on how to prepare for NMAT. This is our first session in a series of webinars that we will conduct in this exam season for you to prepare for various entrance exams such as CAT, NMAT, XAT, SNAP, etc. So, what is so special about NMAT that makes it one of the most favored and important exams in India? As you can see, I have this short note on NMAT prepared in front of me, which I will discuss with you in greater detail over the next half an hour or so. Before that, let me first ask you one question, and you can tell me that, yeah. So, I have shared a question with you. The question is, how many mocks have you practiced so far? And I have given you 4 options: 0 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and more than 9. Take a minute, answer this question, and then we will look at the result of this poll. So right now, what I can see is that most of the people who are live in this session have not attempted more than 3 mocks. Nearly 2/3 of the audience here has attempted only 0 to 3 mocks. Considering that today NMAT has started, and by the way, just for your information, I am one of the few people who went and took NMAT today. So I will be sharing some of my inputs from today, of course, without revealing the questions, as that would put me in violation of the NMAT guidelines. I will reveal some of the information. 0 to 3 is a low number right now, but once we finish this session, you can look at all the strategies that we discuss and try to attempt more mocks over the next few days. Let me now close this particular poll. So, what is the final result? Here, among the people who are already attending this session, nearly 70% have not attended more than 3 mocks. 25% of the people have attempted only 4 to 6 mocks, and there's just a very small minority of 5% of the people who attempted more than 9. So, the session that I'm conducting today is really very useful and important for the first category of the 70% people who've not attempted too many. What exactly is NMAT? And let us now look at the exam in greater detail. Yeah. So as you can see on your screen, NMAT is an exam with 120 questions spread over 120 minutes. 2-hour test, pretty simple at that. 1 minute per question, should be a cakewalk. However, that is not the case. The reason behind that is that NMAT has a lot of salient features, a lot of googlies that it has up its sleeve, which make it different from all the other exams that you take. Well, the first one is that the 3 sections that it has have sectional timings. Now you might say, what's new with that? CAT also has sectional timings, so what? And there's no negative marking, so I should be able to handle the section easily. Well, the big difference between CAT and NMAT is that CAT has 1 hour for each section. So you can, practice your attempts, make your strategy accordingly. As you can see here, and I'll just point it out to you, NMAT has 3 sections. One is quantitative skills, which is essentially mathematics, data interpretation, and data sufficiency, along with reasoning skills, which is a mixture of logical reasoning and verbal, or what is also called critical reasoning. I'll go into more detail later. And finally, language skills, which is nothing but old-fashioned English language. So let's look at each section. As you can see here, quant is 48 questions spread over 60 minutes. Anybody who has ever taken an MBA entrance mock would know that if the time given is more than a minute for a question, the difficulty level of that question has to increase proportionately. And that is true for all NMATs that I have taken in the last 6 to 7 years. Just for your information, I have been taking NMAT every year nearly on the first day, and I have got a score of 240 or more over the last 3 years running. So when I say this, I'm saying it with authority that the questions in Quant and DI in NMAT are probably at par with CAT or with any other top level exam. Do not expect very simple questions or do not expect MHCT level questions just because it's a paper with no negative marking. I will go into the breakup of this section little later. But this by far is the most difficult section of the entire exam. The second section, which is reasoning, typically involves logical reasoning, which is a collection of lot of puzzles, and verbal or critical reasoning, which has a few very common question types such as course of action or conclusions that follow, inferences that follow, etc. Typically what I have seen, and which is also borne out by my experience today as well, is that this section is not very difficult per se. However, because you have very limited time, if you see you have just 38 minutes for 40 questions, it's just less than a minute per question. You can't really sit back at leisure and try to solve the whole section easily. You have to pick the right questions, answer them quickly and move on. The last and probably the easiest section of NMAT is English. Two reasons for this. One, it might appear that there is very little time, 22 minutes for 32 questions. But when you practice your mocks and when you see the kind of questions that appear in NMAT, you will realize that time-wise, this section is not actually a hindrance. You can easily finish this question in less than 22 minutes, provided you are good in English. As you can see, there is no negative marking. So we will now look at all the salient features of this exam in point by point and see how they should be handled. So the first thing that I said, NMAT is a speed test. Of course it is a speed test because you need to finish off the entire paper in just 2 hours. However, here if you can see, I've written accuracy and question selection are also important. Now how does accuracy come into the picture? Sorry. If you just blindly keep marking questions, you are not going to get these marks, and this accuracy becomes important because sectional cutoffs are there for each section. Similarly, question selection becomes important because selection of the right question in the initial part of the section ensures that you have answered more questions in a serious manner and very few questions just randomly. Let me give you an example. The quantitative skills section of NMAT has 20 questions in DI, which means that there are 5 sets in DI. Typically, you will observe that DI has one very difficult set, 2 to 3 moderately difficult sets, and 1 to 2 easy sets. And when I say easy, those sets are sitters. This was true even today. Now, if you have 5 sets out of which 2 are easy, 2 are moderate and 1 is difficult, and you end up selecting the most difficult set to solve, then obviously you're going to waste a lot of time. The questions in NMAT generally are high quality questions in the sense that even the easy sets require you to read the data properly, understand what is asked, and then solve the question. They won't just ask you what is the total number of units sold in 2015. You will never get such a simple question, which means that selecting the right set in DI becomes critical. If you are able to identify the 2 easy sets followed by the 2 moderate ones, you are easily assured of 16 questions in quant very quickly. I do that each year. That is one of the reasons why I keep getting these scores. I start with DI. Of course, it comes with experience. So you cannot have me as a benchmark here. But when I start with the easy sets, I know, okay, this is easy. I start with that, solve it quickly, move to the moderate ones, and then I leave the toughest set for the very end. Similarly, in reasoning, when you look at a set, you need to scroll through it, browse through it, and understand, oh, this is an arrangement set, this is an input-output set, or this is a matrix coding. See how many questions are there in that set, and then take a decision whether to solve that set or not. When I say all this does not happen in one day. This is where the relevance of my first poll will become important. When I said how many mocks have you attempted, 3 mocks is generally a very low benchmark. So I will tell you how to take more mocks in a systematic manner and prepare for NMAT accordingly. So that is the first point that you need to keep in mind. Identify the kind of question. I'm not understand this point. You don't need to identify the exact question because the question will always be different. But identify the kind of question that you need to attempt, practice it as much as you can, and then go with a clear strategy for that question in the exam. The second and probably most important point here is that the section order of NMAT can be selected by the student himself. Now, what does this mean? Let me ask you another question and throw open another poll at you. So, I have given you first, okay, if I have 3 sections, in how many ways can I attempt the 3 sections? Obviously, the easiest answer to this is I need to arrange the 3 section in 3 factorial ways, which means I can attempt them in 6 ways. But what is important is which section do you start with. So I'll throw open a poll for you and you have these 3 options. My question to you is which section are you most comfortable starting? And your options are QA, VA and LR. So again, I'll give you a minute or so. Take your time and let's see how people react. Okay. So here, what I am seeing is that most of the people have answered, and right now I can see at least half the audience preferring VA. So let me now close the poll so that you guys can also see what your preferences are. Okay. So I believe you can now see the poll results, and as you can see, half the audience here prefers starting with VA and 1/3 of the audience starts with QA. Well, what do you think is the exactly good strategy? The answer to this is that there is no correct strategy at all. You cannot assume that starting with VA or starting with QA will give you a definite advantage. To give you another example, it is like saying a Virender Sehwag should bat like a Sachin Tendulkar, who should bat like a Brian Lara, who should bat like a Jack Callis, and so on. Everybody has their own style. And somebody might prefer to get a century with a single, somebody might want to hit a 6. What is important is the outcome. How you get there is your call. Similarly, in this case, you need to know which section gives you the most confidence. And this is something that I've always told my students over the last 10 years or so. Don't go by what any expert says in terms of which section to start with. When you take your mocks, you need to identify that this particular section I am able to solve the questions quickly in the first few minutes. Understand the logic. When you start a paper, you are not completely ready for the test. You are warming up, which means that if you start with a section that you're not very comfortable, you will waste more time warming up in that section and then lose critical time as a result. In that sense, you should ideally start with a section where you're most comfortable. Then based on that, you will obviously start answering a few questions, your confidence will shoot up, and then you will be able to attempt the rest of the paper easily. If you start with something difficult in the hope that ओ ये अभी सबसे टफ जो है मैं पहले कर देता हूँ, ये रास्ते से हट जाएगा तो बाकी सब मैं कर लूंगा. What happens in that case is that in case you come up with very tough questions, you don't have anywhere to hide. My personal choice is the order that I have actually written down on the screen. Quant followed by reasoning followed by language. But that is my choice. Nobody should follow it just because I have said it. You should always go by what you feel is best for you. Sorry. How do you ensure that? As I said, there are 6 section combinations that you can take during the entire mock series. So ideally, you should try to take 1 to 2 mocks based on each combination, which means that in one mock, start with quant followed by VA followed by LR. In the second mock, swap VA and LR. In the third mock, start with VA and so on. By the time you reach your 9th or 10th mock, you will have a very clear idea as to what is your best possible approach. Once you know this approach suits me, go ahead, keep following that later and in the actual exam. So I hope this point has come across to all of you and it will help you in the exam. We move on to the next point now, which as I said is that there is no negative marking, but there are sectional cutoffs. Both these aspects are very important. I have seen students who prefer answering the entire verbal section very well, getting all 32 questions right, and then they do badly in quant and don't get an NMAT, NM call. What you need to do in any exam that has sectional cutoffs is identify your best section, maximize your marks there. In the remaining sections or in the section where you're bad, you should try and ensure that you just clear the cutoff. So there you do what is required, bare minimum. But in the sectionals where you're great, there you try and do your best. Sorry, I have a sore throat, but yeah. So when you take NMAT, because there is no negative marking, in each section, you need to keep at least 2 minutes to answer those questions that you have not marked. How do you ensure that? One, the NMAT interface has a timer on the top right corner which keeps showing you the time. More importantly, NMAT has a 5-minute alert. I don't know how many of you have seen this or not, but when there are 5 minutes left for your section to end, the NMAT interface throws up a box which says that there are only 5 minutes left in this section. As soon as you see that, don't panic saying that, oh, there are just 5 minutes left. What do? I have 10 questions. There is absolutely nothing to worry. Try and solve a couple of questions more in the next 2 to 3 minutes. When there are only 1 or 2 minutes left, you should mark the rest of the questions. However, please ensure that you have always attempted all 120 questions. Even if you get them wrong, there is no harm. There are rumors across the industry that people cut marks if you have attempted too many wrong questions, but nothing of that sort happens in NMAT. Okay, moving forward to the next point. I have written a very interesting thing here. Group questions can be asked together or hidden in various parts of a section. Now, this is something that I have never encountered in any other exam. But yes, this has happened to me in NMAT. What does this mean? This typically has happened in LR sections. What happens is, let's say I have a set where they tell me there are 5 cards, 5 cards, 5 colors, 5 numbers written on the card, 5 people with the card, etc. So there's a 5 by 5 matrix and you're supposed to solve it. You end up solving it and there's just one question, which is question number 2. Then you go on to the next question and so on. Suddenly at question number 10, you find the same data and there's again the same question given there. So the data is the same, there's a different question. You again solve it, answer a few more questions, and question 22 again has the same common data. The same repeats for question 35. So the trick here is that they've taken the common data, they've taken one set, divided it into 4 parts and asked it in the different parts of the same section, which makes it infinitely more difficult to solve. That is where if when the NMAT authorities give you the scratch pad, don't just scribble blindly on the scratch pad. If you are solving a set, solve it systematically. So even if the question comes in later, you can always go back to the set, answer the question and move on. And be rest assured that if you find that question 2 and 10 are from the same set, there will be more questions hidden somewhere later. So it makes a lot of sense to go ahead, find those questions and come back. This might not actually happen in verbal, or it might happen rarely in quant, but it is very likely to happen in the LR section. Moving on, NMAT has a very unique interface. When I say unique interface, I've written down 2 of the major points that make it different from the other interfaces. One is that when there is a split screen, let me show you here. I don't have the actual screen with me right now, but let's say this part of the screen has the common data and this part of the screen has the question. Now, if there is some other point given here, and if you try to click next out here, it will not allow you till you have scrolled down, or it will not allow you till you have scrolled right and seen every question in the screen. Now assume that this is an RC and there is some data out here. It does not matter if you have seen it for the first question. When you go to the second question, it will again throw the same error. You have not seen all the data on the screen. Please see the data and then move on. When you go to the third question, it will still do the same. When you go to the next question, it will still do the same. See, it's a machine. It does not know whether you've read it or not. It just behaves the way it has been taught to. So every time you see a scroll bar, either vertically or horizontally, make it a point to scroll to all parts of the screen, or the interface will keep wasting your time. The second important point is the review pane. This is extremely critical. When you leave a question in, say, maths, when you have finished seeing all the questions, question number 48 when you see, after that you will see a review screen where you'll come to know what are the incomplete questions. There are, in my opinion, there are 2 major defects with the review screen. One is that question, let's say there is a DI set, a pie chart, which is question number 5 to 8. So you will see an incomplete year against 5, then you will see an incomplete year against 6, then year against 7, and year against 8. So the questions, instead of being vertical, are given in a horizontal manner, which means that when you have left a number of questions, it becomes very difficult to identify which ones were the question that you left. Plus, it doesn't tell you which is a group question. So suppose question 5 to 8 was a DI set. Then there were 3 individual questions, 9, 10, 11. Then there was again a DI set, 12 to 16 or 12 to 15. On the review screen, there is absolutely no way to identify where the group question starts and where the group question ends. This is one area where students end up wasting a lot of time. Even somebody like me who is so experienced in taking NMAT always loses time because of this. So it might be a good idea when you leave any set, DI or RC or LR. When you leave a set, note down the question number of the first question of that set. मतलब अगर आपका DI सेट क्वेश्चन नंबर 20 से शुरू होता है तो क्वेश्चन 20 को अपने स्क्रैच पैड पे नोट कर लीजिए. That will help you when you go to the review screen. This covers the overall features of the actual exam. There are two other features here which I've mentioned. One is that, as you know, NMAT allows you 3 attempts. So obviously there is less pressure on that day, because even if you do badly on one day, you can always take another attempt. Secondly, your final score is never the average of your 3 scores. It's the best of your 3 scores. So if you get 180, 200 and 210, the score considered will always be 210. It will not be the average, which will be around say 195 or 197 or so. And as you know, the pre-interface, the pre-exam study time is always available. So you should spend those 10 minutes given to look at the interface, study it thoroughly. Ideally, you should be aware of the interface right from the beginning. You shouldn't wait till the last minute and see it in the exam. So this covers the broad features of what NMAT is all about. What I will do now is that, since you spent nearly half an hour listening to me, now is the time when I should listen to you and let you give in your inputs. So as you can see, there is a tab called questions on your screen. The way it will function is that you can type in your questions, and I will, once I start getting the questions on my screen, I will read them out and verbally give you the answers to this question. In case you do miss out something, please note that the recording of this session will be available. So we will make all efforts to make it public very soon after the session itself. In case I miss out a certain question or you miss out an answer, be rest assured you will get the answer to your question. If I am unable to answer a question right now, we will, you can always send it to us later and I'll answer it personally on mail later. The first question that I've got is a request to mail the recording session. So that is something that will anyways happen, as I said, after the session is over. So be rest assured you will get answers to your question. But guys, you can now post as many questions as you want. Okay. The first question that I've got is, how many minimum mocks to give before the actual NMAT? Well, it depends on how many attempts you are planning to take. I would say in general, you should try to take at least 10 to 12 mocks in general. So if you are planning to take 3 attempts, take 6 mocks before your first attempt, analyze that and then take 3 more mocks, analyze that and then take 3 more mocks. If you are planning to take 2 attempts, then you can divide it in the ratio 8:4. If you're planning to take just 1 attempt like me, then you should take all 12 mocks before your first attempt. The next question is from Kiran, and the question is, how does accuracy become important? Question selection is understood. Well, Kiran, accuracy is important in the first half of a section, because typically that is when you're solving the questions in all sincerity. When I say in all sincerity, what I mean is that in the last 4 to 5 minutes, you're often marking the questions based on educated guesses, or you're marking the questions based on, just blind guessing because you don't have time. Whereas you're trying to maximize your marks in the first half or first 75% of the section by answering the questions that you're most aware of or most comfortable with. So there your accuracy is important, because if there you lose out on accuracy, then your overall score is going to take a huge hit. I hope that answers your question. The next question that I've got is from Ankur, who asked me how close test funda mocks are to the NMAT exam. Well, Ankur, based on our experience of NMAT, we have tried to make them as close as possible. Of course, because there are so many days and so many slots, you will always have some amount of your questions which will repeat or which will be common from our mocks and the actual NMAT, and that happens across all institutes. I have friends in various institutes who tell me that some of our questions came in the exam. So there I will not boast and say that, oh, our mocks are completely close to NMAT. But yes, I can confidently say that if you practice all 12, you should be confident of a score about 200 if you do it in all sincerity. The next question that I am taking up is from Pulkit, who asked me what is the best way to prepare if I'm starting today. Uh, Pulkit, here the answer would depend also on your background, in the sense that are you also taking CAT, are you also taking the other exams? Secondly, have you taken any of these exams earlier? And when I say earlier, I mean last year or the year before that, because there I would then assume that you know what the syllabus is, or the so-called syllabus is, what are the topics that you need to prepare for, how do you answer a multiple choice question, etc. If you've never taken any of these, then I would say you should take NMAT right away and forget the score, because you'll just come to know what the exam is all about. Then you can try and take a second attempt somewhere in the mid of November, which is 1 month from now, and then take a third attempt very close to the last date. You will, accordingly, you will need to start taking a mock straight away, prepare every day for 3 to 4 hours on the theory part of it, especially in maths, and keep taking a mock. So if I divide 2 months by 12 days, you'll have to take a mock near every 5 to 6 days. That is probably the only way you will be able to prepare for NMAT. I have a question here. Will we know the result of the first test before we take up the second? Indira, this is not necessarily true. Yes, if the gap between your two mocks is large, then you will come to know the result. Typically, I think there is a limit of 18 sessions after which they start compiling the result. That is informal. There is no formal information available. But what they do is somewhere around 12 to 15 days after day one, they start compiling the results, bring out the result of one slot, and then compile for the next 15 days. So it doesn't really matter too much, and I don't think you should worry too much about results, because if the first result is not in your favor, then you will end up worrying too much about the second attempt and put a lot of pressure on yourself. Gunjan has a question for me where uh, you need tips on calculation intensive DI. Well, NMAT, as I said, has 5 DI sets. One of them is tough, 2 to 3 are moderate, 2 to 3 are easy. NMAT typically has a couple of calculation based DI sets where you get a lot of questions on percentage growth, averaging out, or a percentage increase, decrease, etc. For this, you need to brush up on multiplication and division in a very quick manner. Secondly, you need to know your percentage growth concepts very well. Thirdly, it is not always necessary to solve the question completely. For example, in one NMAT in a given year, sorry, I had a question where I had to know what is the highest percentage growth across the 5 years. And the values were pretty bad. 723 divided by 1032 and so on. So all I had to do was see the numerator and denominator for one of them and realize that that was coming out to approximately double. Once you know that that is my benchmark, because if the numerator is twice the denominator, I have a 200% growth. Once I know that, all I need to start doing is comparing the other values, whether the other numerator is more than double, less than double, or so on. By doing this much, I was able to bring down the values to just 2 out of 5. Then I can calculate. So in every question, what you should do is when you take your mock, after you solve the mock, don't worry about it in the actual mock, at least in the initial ones. But after you have solved it, you need to look at the mock and see, oh, how could I have solved this question faster? Was there a way I could have observed the values given in the table and solved it faster? Could I have eliminated certain options? Could I have looked at one value as a reference and then eliminated, etc.? And I'm sure that you will be able to come up with faster solutions in your second attempt. By the time you reach your sixth or seventh mock, you will be able to answer questions faster anyways. Shoaib has a question for me where he is asking, is it okay to take NMAT after CAT? Shoaib, in my opinion, there is no harm as long as you are confident of taking NMAT after CAT. However, if you're going to try multiple attempts, then I would say try and take one NMAT as soon as possible. Otherwise, there is no harm altogether. Just keep in mind one psychological aspect. Your CAT, whatever happens in your CAT, the perceived experience of CAT. If you feel that my CAT was not good, then it might end up affecting your NMAT result or NMAT performance as well. So that is something that you need to take care. Moving to the next question, Shivani has a question. Does the accuracy in a section get taken into consideration? Shivani, as I said, accuracy does matter in terms of answering the questions. But if you have XYZ number of questions wrong, it does not matter simply because there is no negative marking. So contrary to what anybody might have told you, if I have attempted 20 correct questions, I will still get 60 marks. And I have attempted 20 wrong. Let's say I have 20 right, 20 wrong, I'll get 60. You have 20 right and 5 wrong, you will still get 60. There is no difference at all. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, Neha is asking, how was today's paper? Neha, my paper was good. So thanks for asking that. But in general, if you were to ask me what was the difficulty level of the paper, I don't want to scare you, but I would say it was slightly tougher compared to last year. I found that the quant section was considerably tougher compared to 2015. The tough questions were really on the unsolvable side, but there were a lot of sitters as well. And these, once I identified the sitters, some of them could be done orally. There were some tough questions which I felt that even I could not solve in the exam scenario. Maybe sitting here in the office, I can solve them. So in that sense, quant was tough. I would say LR was moderate. Again, some unsolvable questions and some very easy ones. And finally, which section is left? Verbal. Verbal was easy, typical. But you need to have a good vocabulary and you need to have good reading skills to be able to handle the verbal section of NMAT. To take the next question, Yash asks me, can we not take all the mocks before the first mock and then keep analyzing? Yash, you can always do that. The only problem with this approach is that if you feel that I need to change my strategy a bit and practice again, then you don't have any mock left. If you feel that you want to maximize the number of mocks, then let's say you have a 12 mock set with you. Try out 9 before your first attempt, keep 2 for the second attempt and 1 for the last attempt. But generally I would not advise to attempt all 12 before your first attempt. Okay, Vidhi has her exam scheduled tomorrow. So firstly, all the best Vidhi, and I hope you do very well. You have taken 5 mocks and you've scored 213 in them. I would say it is an excellent score. Your question is that you lose a lot of time in input, output and coding questions. Could you please suggest a strategy? Okay, Vidhi, let me just give you a personal experience from today. My input output set today was horrible. I managed to solve a grouping set just before it and a grouping set just after it very easily. But when it came to input output, I just went bonkers and I didn't know how to solve it. What I did was marked it for the time being and left it. I came back at the end of the set and tried to solve it again. But unfortunately, I couldn't get the logic in the limited time. So whatever answers I had marked, I let it be. The same also applies to coding. Remember one thing, Viri, because it is such a quick exam to answer, if there is a sort of thumb rule that if you're not able to understand the logic for input, output or coding in the first minute or so, you will not get it even if you spend more time, or you will end up spending 10-15 minutes on it. So I don't think you should spend so much time for such questions where at the most you will get 4 marks. You have a lot of other questions in the LR section where you can try out getting your marks. I'm not saying this to discourage you, but the reason I'm saying this is the input output questions in NMAT typically tend to be very different from all other exams. So all the typical tricks that you use like rearrangement or adding, subtracting digits, etc., doesn't work straight away in NMAT. You can be able to solve them, but you will waste time. So if it's easy, answer it right away or leave it for the end. The next question that I take up is Pulkit has a question and Rahul has a question where we want to know what is the expected cutoff in NMAT. I would say 210 is what should be your benchmark for NMAT as far as Mumbai is concerned. Anything about 210 starts getting you into a safe zone. 205 to 210 is a slightly borderline case. Below 205 is a little difficult to get into Mumbai, especially with a lot of competition coming in. So ideally, in your mocks at home, you should target 200. In the actual exam, you should target 210 to 215. Jai Narsiman has a question for me where he asks, how do I manage time in the reasoning section? Okay, Jai, what I do in the reasoning section is I don't really go about with a clear-cut strategy, because every year I have seen that the nature of questions keeps changing. But there are some question types which I've observed which help me maximize marks. For example, typically NMAT always has 2 to 3 sets on various kinds of arrangements. It could be arranging lectures in a week, or it could be those matrix type questions where you have 5 people, 5 colors, 5 destinations, etc. And they always have 3 to 4 questions. So I try and target those 8 questions first so that I get 8 marks right. I get 8 questions right away. Then because I am good at English, I also look at the 10 to 12 verbal reasoning or critical reasoning questions and answer them quickly because they don't take up too much time. So effectively, I managed to answer 20 questions in approximately, you can say, 25 odd minutes. Then the remaining 20 questions I know will be a collection of various things: direction sense, relationships, puzzles, coding, decoding, series analogies. So there I go strictly by instinct. If I'm able to, I have a thumb rule. If I'm able to solve a question within a minute, I answer it. If I'm not able to solve it, I go ahead and forget the question for the time being. I come back to it in the last 2 minutes. Sumit's question is, does the quant section of NMAT and CAT be the same? Sumit, when I say same, no, they are definitely not the same. They are two different challenges, especially if I look at the quant section of CAT last year. The pure quant questions of CAT were simpler compared to NMAT. But remember, there is a difference. The quant section of NMAT also includes 20 questions of DI and 6 questions of data sufficiency. That makes the NMAT quant tougher. In CAT, the DI is a separate section altogether. So in NMAT, you can get away with practicing a lot of arithmetic and geometry, etc. Plus, you don't need to worry about negative marking. So don't compare quant and NMAT and CAT ka quant. Focus on NMAT as it is. Dhruv wants to know the preparation strategy for vocab and do the vocab questions repeat in the same window. Dhruv, let me answer both your questions one by one. The vocab questions sometimes repeat in the same window. Certain years I have seen that more than one person or people in my batch have got the same questions. Sometimes I've seen that nobody has got the same question. So those kind of things happen. For the vocab preparation strategy, I would say at this stage, there is not much that you can do. What you should keep in mind is that NMAT typically asks all the vocab questions together. There are 5 to 6 of them. And the instructions for them are identify the word that is closest in meaning, which is a synonym, or identify the word that is most opposite in meaning. The most typical mistake that people make is that they don't read the instruction. They just look at the word, they see the options and mark the synonym. You need, and NMAT typically has this habit of mixing questions on synonyms and antonyms back to back. So that is something you definitely need to take care of. Thirdly, when you are tackling vocab questions, look at the usage of the word. You need not know the actual meaning of the word, but you need to look at the usage. So that again, for example, if I were to say, let me look at some word. Where let's say if we are talking about rage, and you need to look at the antonym, then you will find that there are 2 or 3 words which are very similar to rage, like let's say fury, etc., which are there in the options. So you need to look at those and start eliminating options. Sakshi's question is that what is the minimum score that we should get in each section to clear the cutoff for NMIMS Mumbai? Okay, Sakshi, I had mentioned that in one of my articles earlier, but as far as I know, the scores are somewhere around 68 to 80 for the 3 sections. I don't remember them offhand. What I will do is I have it somewhere on my machine. I'll get the exact data and we'll mail it across to you. So this is something, be rest assured, I'll get back to you on this. I have the scores on my machine. I will note them down and mail you the same. Neha has a question where she says that she gave 2 attempts. One was very easy and one was more than moderate, and she got the same marks. Neha, yes, this does happen. This is because of something called normalization. What it means is that there are some questions which are common to all the exams in a certain time period. Let's say I take 10 days from today to 16th. There will be some questions which are called reference questions which are common to all the exams, and that is where the difficulty level of the exams is mapped. So if your exam qualifies as easy and you have a score of 180, whereas let's say you score 200 in an easy exam versus 170 in a tough exam, it will get averaged out internally, or it will get scaled down and scaled up, and you will get a final score of 185 or 190 in both the exams. So they have a process called normalization, which is not explained in detail, but I would say do not focus on that part of it because nobody knows the exact algorithm. Rather focus on what you can do with your scores. Sarang has another question. How was the quant section distributed? Was it more of arithmetic? Sarang, slightly risky question to answer because I am basing it only on one sample set and I don't know whether it violates their confidentiality clause. But yes, my test had a fair bit of arithmetic in it. I would say approximately maybe 40% of my section was arithmetic, with the remaining 3 sections, algebra, geometry and modern math, distributed fairly between the other 3 sections. So I hope that answers your question. Again, I have one more question on sectional cutoff marks from Rohit. Sectional, Rohit, as I said earlier, I don't remember the exact marks, but as far as I remember, I think English was somewhere in the low 70s, quant was somewhere in the low 80s, and LR was somewhere in the higher 60s, somewhere around 68 or so. But I will again get back to you on this after rechecking. Sandeep has a question for me. What are the important points and areas to review while analyzing the mocks? Sandeep, extremely important question. When you analyze any mock, forget NMAT. When you analyze any mock, what you should do is don't look just at your score or at your percentile. You should look at your solutions versus the solutions given in the mocks and see how they differ. Sometimes you will find that you solved it in a lengthy manner, whereas the actual solution given is faster because there was some way of eliminating options or some way of substituting some value and solving for the questions, etc. Also, for each section, try to identify whether there is a certain set of questions or chapters where you are going wrong. That will tell you what are your main improvement areas. Identify the areas where you're always scoring quickly because that will tell you where you're strong. What happens very often is that we keep focusing on our strengths and miss out on our weaknesses. Secondly, when you know that these are the areas where you're going wrong, then you can analyze them further and pinpoint the areas where you need to improve. So two major points. Look at where you're going wrong, identify where you're going wrong, and even in questions that you got right, see how you can come up with a better solution. Sakshi, again, I just answered the same question earlier where people asked about sectional cutoffs. As I said, as far as I remember, high 60s for LR, low 70s for verbal and low 80s for quant, but I will get back again on this. Kiran's question is, in verbal, RCs are in the end. So do you suggest they should be done before like we do DI in quant? Kiran, depends on student to student. If you feel that you will not have enough time left for RCs, then you should do it right in the beginning. If RC is something you are not very comfortable with and you go wrong, then don't do it in the beginning. Verbal typically has 2-3 very easy question types. One is preposition based fill in the blanks. One is close passages. So one of the things you can do is try and start with that. So you know that I've got 7 to 8 marks or 7 to 8 questions right away. Then you can move on to RCs because you're now confident that you have some marks in the bag. Mridul has a very interesting question. How to know when to leave the question and move on to the next question in quant? Mridul, I will answer this question in general for all sections. The first thing here is this does not apply only to quant. I would say what happens is when you read a question, typically if you have practiced enough, you know whether you can identify whether you know the concepts required for this question or you don't know the concepts required for this question. If you know the concepts, you can at least start solving it and then take a call depending on how much is the calculation. If you don't know the concepts or if you're not very sure, then sometimes it makes a lot of sense to just ignore the question right away and come back to it later. But typically if you want a benchmark, of course you can't start timing it. Try to solve the question, try to understand. If your timer shows you that you've spent more than a minute or 2 minutes on it, there's no sense attempting it right now. The next question from Shoaib is that is the difficulty level increased for NMAT by every slot? Shoaib, the answer to this is no. There is no data on this. There is no fixed information on this. So if somebody tells you it increases, he is probably either fooling you or he's basing his information on half data. Don't go by this. Just go for your slot and answer the questions well. इतना analysis किसी को काम नहीं लगता. What is the safe cutoff for NMIMS? As I mentioned earlier, it is 210 for Mumbai, anywhere between 210 to 215. And for Hyderabad and Bangalore, it would be anywhere above 195. Praveen's question is, does the score have a weightage in final selection? Of course, yes. It does have a weightage. The weightage may change every year, but it does have a weightage. Okay, there are two quant related questions, one from Rohit and one from Sakshi. Rohit says I am weak in quant, and Sakshi says that she starts panicking after seeing lengthy questions in quant. Sakshi, firstly, not all questions in quant are lengthy. However, whichever mock that you solve, there is one way to get rid of your panic. Don't focus on time. After you solve the mock, after you attempt the mock at home, take each of those quant questions and try to solve them without any time limit. You will realize that you are able to solve half the questions very easily. Then that confidence that, oh, quant is very tough will go away. Rohit, the same thing applies to you. When you say I am weak in quant, that is a very general statement. Nobody is weak in quant as a whole. You will be weak in some parts of quant, whether it's arithmetic or numbers or algebra or geometry or PNC, etc. When you take a few mocks, you need to identify where am I weak. You will find that, oh, I'm able to solve time and distance, ratio proportion, mixture allocation very quickly. But when it comes to numbers, I'm not able to solve it. When it comes to PNC, I'm not able to solve it. That will tell you where you should improve. Uh, I have a question. How much do you get in NMAT? Well, as I said, I have got my last three scores have been 241, 249 and 235. Trust this answers your question. What is the cutoff for NMS Bangalore and Hyderabad? Generally, it is somewhere around 190, but it can change each year. Dharmik has a question. I am weak in geometry and am planning to skip geometry questions. Dharmik, why do you want to skip questions? Today when I took the test, there was one question which was absolutely simple, and I'm giving you a hint. It was based on Pythagoras, simple Pythagoras. So why would you skip that question? There was one question which was very tough, which I skipped. So there were two questions. I answered one, I left one. So my point to you is don't go with preconceived notions. आप एग्जाम में क्वेश्चन देखिए, इजी होगा तो आप उसको आंसर कर दीजिए, अदरवाइज मत कीजिए. All of us here are very intelligent people who've done well in school and come. So I trust all of you to do well in NMAT. Guys, don't lose your confidence. Praveen has a question. Is there any specific topic in quant which needs to be practiced more? Praveen, I wouldn't really say that, because every year I've seen a different breakup coming in. So I wouldn't say you practice this topic or that topic. I think I answered Mridil's question earlier, how to know when to leave the question. So I'm skipping it for now. Jay has a question. How do you attempt RC? Passage first or question first? Yeah, this is something that didn't come up so far. So I'll spend a little time on this. Jay, what I do is I read the passage first, but not too much in detail. I just read it very quickly, more like a scan to understand what the subject of the passage is all about. Then I go to the question, read the question, and even without looking at the options, I start reading the passage in more detail. This strategy works for me. It might not work for everybody. But if you spend too much time reading the passage first and then go to all the questions, you'll end up wasting time. If you look at the questions directly, then you will be biased while reading the passage. So ideally, I would say it's best always to scan it first, go to the questions and then go to the specific part of the passage. Amit has two questions that his focus has been on CAT. What should I prepare for NMAT separately? Amit, theory wise, you don't need to prepare anything separately for NMAT, because whatever you study for CAT will apply equally to NMAT. What you need to know is the kind of questions that are asked in NMAT. That practice can come only by solving mocks. Abhishek has a question. When can we see result of an attempt? As I answered earlier, you can see the result nearly 15 to 20 days after your attempt. And there are slots. So the starting from today, I think they'll look at around 20th of October. And उसके बाद 23rd, 25th के बीच में first set का result आएगा. Then they'll again look at the next 15 days. How to decide if you should attempt NMAT again or not? Well, frankly, that is again completely your call. Depends on how desperate you are to get into NMIMS and how you feel your paper went. But it is always better to be safe than sorry. So if you feel that your paper wasn't very great, then always go ahead and attempt it again. There's no harm in that. So guys, I am now running out of time. So what I would suggest is, in case I have missed any question, and I think I've missed a few questions right at the end, what you can do is, I'll give you my email ID and I will type it here. So you guys can send me a mail and say that we attended this webinar and this is the question that we had, and I will try and answer them as soon as possible. In case you have your NMAT scheduled in the next 2 or 3 days, please mention it in the question, because we are not working officially for the next 2 days. So if it is that urgent, then I'll try and answer it on priority right away. Yeah. So just hold on for a second and I will type my email ID out here. I have just sent all of you my email ID. In case anyone is not able to see it, I will spell it out right now. It is Gaurav.Dave, Gaurav. I'll type it again. Gaurav.Dave. D for Delhi, A for Ahmedabad, V for Victory, E for Elephant, at testfunda.com. This is the ID on which you can send me your doubts, but please mention that you were part of the webinar so that I can search for the mails quickly. Yeah, I think you can now see the ID. So guys, wish all of you all the very best. Do well in your NMAT. Feel free to contact us and contact me if you have any doubts. Very soon I will be back with another session related to CAT, and for the next 2 months I am right at your disposal for any help that you guys need for your MBA preparation. All the best, guys.